Hey, good morning. It's Tom Llewellyn with Civil, and I wanted to talk today about because the people on the left are in office. Let's talk about them, right? We'll get to the guys, the other side, when they get back in office, if they do. But I wanted to talk about socialism, capitalism, and democracy. I actually have a book coming out probably in April. That's a different story. But today's topic kind of includes that, right? And it's like, what is this left thing? What is this socialism thing? And I've had more than a few people say, oh, well, I'm kind of to the left and I'm not really socialist, or I'm socialist and that's not communism, and all those kind of things. So let's just go back to the beginning with Karl Marx. Karl wrote Das Kapital in the Communist Manifesto. Basically, he was trying to figure out, how do I replace capitalism? Because it's this awful thing. And if you lived in the 1850s in England, you'd look around and go, man, this is not pretty. Very tough time. You're going through rapid industrialization. Things were rough. There's no question about that. But they were less rough than they were during the more feudal times, when people couldn't own property. They lived off the king. They farmed his land, and he gave them whatever he thought they deserved for recompense. Was usually a couple of bushels of corn or whatever to feed themselves. So, what wasn't pretty times. The industrial world, as it matured, got much better, but at the time, pretty ugly during Marx's time, right? But he looked at it and he was trying to figure out, how can this socialism thing replace these kings and queens and popes, right? That was his hope. It's like, let's replace these guys and do non-capitalist things, because that's what they were starting to do, right? They were starting to say, oh, well, we have some property rights, and oh, now there's a middle class, and but they were never very committed to it, right? They liked being kings, queens, and popes, right? So what happened, though, is when you look at what he wrote, he didn't really replace capitalism. He replaced feudalism. He replaced kings, queens, and popes with elites, experts, and secular theists. Basically, communism is a two-class society. It's everybody else and the elites, right? That tight group. Feudalism is the same way. It's everyone else, and the pejorative at the time was commoners. Commoners weren't smart enough to figure out what they needed. They needed the king to tell them, right? Well, communism and socialism is the same way. Well, the new word is probably deplorables. I think that's one Hillary used, but other words have been used, probably equally as ugly. But at the end of the day, socialism is the same kind of thing. It's a two-class society. And that's what we're seeing now. We see all these elites and quote-unquote experts and secular theists who are equally intolerant as are the regular theists, the Christian right potentially. And it's like, all we're doing with this kind of socialist approach is going back to feudalism and a two-class society where the smart people take care of the people in flyover country, right? Like we're a bunch of idiots, right? So at the end of the day, kind of step back and consider, is this really what you're voting for? Is this something that you think is good? That government, quote unquote, because it always acts in the good, with good intentions. We all know the road to hell is paved with good intentions, but that good intentions is enough. That are there really any experts that can literally write down how we're supposed to live? Well, probably not. I mean, it's a hard thing, especially if you're an evolutionary society and culture like the United States is. We keep growing, expanding, getting smarter. So I would suggest, if you think you're kind of floating that way, think about maybe how important individual rights are. Think about how important our freedoms are. That all those things that aren't written down maybe shouldn't be written down, because it allows us to operate freely, to think freely, to do freely, to debate freely, something that's very hard these days. So anyway, that's my 2 cents. If you've got questions, or send notes, or pass this along, or whatever, if you think it's interesting. Anyway, I'm Tom. I'll see you next week.